Black Belt kicked a royal guard in the face, but his training didn't prepare him for what came next. The day had begun like any other for Jason, a martial artist with years of experience under his belt. He had spent most of his life mastering the art of karate, earning a black belt in the process. His dedication to the sport had earned him respect from his peers, and he was known for his focus, strength, and calm nature. But there was one thing that Jason didn't expect on this trip, a lesson that would forever change how he saw the world, his skills, and the people around him. Jason was on vacation with a group of friends in a country known for its rich history and royal heritage. They had decided to visit a famous palace that had been standing for centuries. The grandeur of the place amazed everyone, but it wasn't just the historical significance that made the visit memorable. There was something else, a moment of foolishness that would soon lead to unexpected consequences. The group had wandered through the palace grounds, taking pictures and admiring the architecture. Jason's friends were eager to explore, while he was content to observe and enjoy the surroundings. They eventually made their way to the area where the royal guards stood immovable, proud, and unwavering in their duties. These guards were more than just figures of authority, they were part of a tradition that had lasted for generations. The sight of the guards, dressed in their full ceremonial uniforms, sparked something in Jason. His black belt, a symbol of his skill and discipline, felt heavy around his waist. For the first time in a long while, he was no longer the person in control. He was no longer the one calling the shots. Something about the guards' stern faces, their ability to stand still for hours, challenged him. As Jason's friends moved around, taking pictures and chatting, he felt a sudden urge to test his reflexes. He had been practicing martial arts for years, and his skills were sharp. He could kick higher, punch faster, and react quicker than most. But something told him that he needed to see if he could challenge the guards just a little, of course. It would be harmless, right? Hey, Jason. You should kick one of them, his friend Mark joked, nudging him in the ribs. I bet you can't get close enough. Jason smiled at the challenge, but there was something about the thought that intrigued him. His friends laughed, but the seriousness of the guard's stance only added to the challenge. They weren't allowed to move, not even a little. Jason, with his black belt, felt like he could move past them without a hitch. It would be a test of his skills, just a simple, harmless prank. He walked closer to the nearest guard, his friend's laughter in the background. The guard's eyes didn't follow him, they stayed straight ahead, as if Jason wasn't even there. This only fueled Jason's desire to prove something to himself. Without thinking too much about it, he raised his leg and kicked at the air near the guard's face, intending only to get a reaction. But what happened next was not at all what Jason had planned. His kick landed not near, but directly on the guard's cheek. The force of the kick was enough to make the guard sway slightly. Time seemed to freeze. The laughter from Jason's friends died down in an instant. Jason stood there, stunned, his legs still in the air, the realization of what he had just done dawning on him. The guard, who had been unmovable, now had his head turned sharply to the side, his eyes wide with surprise and fury. The silence was deafening. The air around Jason seemed to thicken, and his heart raced. His friends, too, were in shock. Mark, who had initially suggested the prank, now stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. For a moment, Jason didn't know how to react. His black belt, his years of training, his respect for the martial arts, all of it had led him to this point. But no amount of training could have prepared him for the situation unfolding before him. He had just kicked a royal guard, one of the most respected figures in the palace, in the face. What had started as a harmless challenge had quickly turned into something much more serious. The royal guard didn't speak. His face, previously impassive, now looked tense with anger. The moment of silence stretched longer, and Jason's mind raced. He wanted to apologize, to explain that it had been a mistake, a prank. But the words wouldn't come. The situation felt beyond his control. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his chest. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps approached from behind. Two palace security officers, noticing the commotion, quickly arrived at the scene. Their expressions were stern, and without a word, they began to guide Jason and his friends away from the area. Jason, still in shock, couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. What had he done? How had his black belt, something that had always been a source of pride, led him to this? The guards escorted them to a small holding area near the palace. Jason tried to explain, his words stumbling out in a rush. He never meant to cause any harm. He was just having fun, testing his skills. But the royal guard didn't say anything. His eyes, cold and unyielding, remained fixed on Jason, as if judging him. One of the officers turned to Jason and his friends. "You will remain here until further notice," the officer said firmly. "You have disrespected the royal guard. This is not a matter to be taken lightly." Jason's friends exchanged nervous glances. No one spoke. It was clear that they were all caught in a situation that none of them had expected. As they waited in the holding area, Jason's mind raced. He was a black belt. He had trained for years, preparing for anything that came his way. But this was different. This wasn't a match or a sparring session. This wasn't about proving who was stronger or faster. This was real life, and the consequences were more serious than anything he had ever encountered before. For the first time in years, Jason began to question everything he had learned. What was the true purpose of his martial arts training? Was it only about defeating others, or was there something deeper he had overlooked? As he sat there, waiting for what would happen next, Jason realized that this was a moment of reckoning, a test not of his physical strength, but of his character. What he didn't know was that this moment would lead him down a path that would change his life forever. He had kicked a royal guard in the face, but the real lesson was yet to come. And it would be one he would never forget. Jason sat nervously in the small, cold room, his thoughts swirling like a storm. His heart raced as he glanced at his friends, who were equally silent, their faces filled with worry. The atmosphere around them was thick with tension, the weight of the moment settling heavily on each of them. Jason's mind kept replaying the moment when his foot made contact with the royal guard's face. It felt like time had slowed down, and he could still see the shock in the guard's eyes, the split second of disbelief before the anger took over. The silence in the holding area was deafening. Jason tried to steady his breathing, but it was hard. He had been through many difficult situations in his life, but none like this. None where his actions had such immediate and serious consequences. The black belt he wore, the symbol of years of training, now felt heavy around his waist. It no longer felt like a source of pride, it felt like a reminder of how reckless and impulsive he had been. He glanced over at Mark, who had been the one to jokingly suggest he kick the guard. Mark sat with his head down, his hands clasped tightly together. Jason could see the regret in his friend's eyes. This wasn't how they had imagined spending their vacation. No one had expected anything like this to happen, and certainly not at the royal palace. They had all come here to enjoy the beauty of the place, to take in the history, and now they were stuck in a small room, waiting for something they couldn't control. As time passed, the reality of the situation began to sink in deeper. Jason had caused an international incident. He had kicked a royal guard in front of his friends and palace officials. There were consequences to this, and Jason had no idea what they might be. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if the authorities were called? What if they were banned from the country? What if he was arrested? The questions swirled around him, each one more terrifying than the last. After what felt like hours, one of the officers returned, his stern expression giving no clue as to what would happen next. He stood in front of them and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "The royal guard has requested that you remain here until further notice. His request is not negotiable." The officer's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Jason swallowed hard, trying to find the right words, but he couldn't. "Is there any way we can make this right?" Jason asked, his voice shaking slightly. He felt small, powerless, like a child caught doing something wrong. The officer looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity in his words. "You will need to wait until the royal palace officials decide on the matter. It will not be quick. Your actions have consequences, and you must face them." The officer turned and walked out of the room, leaving them in complete silence again. The door clicked shut behind him, and Jason let out a long breath. What did he mean by royal palace officials? Jason had no idea how high the stakes were, but he had a sinking feeling that things were about to get much worse. He sat back against the cold stone wall, his legs aching from sitting in the same position for so long. The minutes ticked by slowly, like each second was dragging them deeper into trouble. He thought about his family, his students, the people who looked up to him as a martial artist. What would they think if they knew what he had done? What kind of example had he set? He had always tried to teach others the importance of self-control and discipline. But now, his own actions seemed to contradict everything he had ever stood for. As the hours stretched on, Jason felt a deep sense of shame settle in his chest. He had let his ego get the better of him. He had let the playful challenge from his friends cloud his judgment, and now, here he was waiting for a decision that could change everything. He had never imagined that a simple prank could lead to such a serious situation. It was a harsh reminder that no matter how skilled you are, no matter how many years you've spent training, you are never fully prepared for every situation life throws at you. Mark finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "I didn't think it would go this far. I'm sorry, Jason. I didn't mean for this to happen." His words were full of regret, but Jason could see that Mark was genuinely remorseful. It was clear that none of them had expected things to escalate like this. They had all laughed at the idea of testing the royal guard's composure, but none of them had considered the possible consequences. "It's not your fault," Jason said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should have known better. I should have thought before I acted." His words hung in the air, heavy with regret. He had been the one to make the choice, and now he was facing the consequences. He had always prided himself on his self-discipline, but in that one moment, he had thrown it all away. The room seemed even quieter now, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. It wasn't just about the guard anymore. It was about Jason's sense of self, his identity as a martial artist, and his understanding of what it truly meant to be a master. He had spent so much time focusing on his physical strength, on being faster, stronger, and more skilled than others. But now, it felt like all of that had been for nothing. He had failed to show the most important quality of all, restraint. Suddenly, the door to the holding room opened again. This time, it wasn't an officer who entered. It was a tall man in a military uniform, with a stern, commanding presence. His eyes were sharp, and his posture was straight, as though he was accustomed to being in control of every situation. Jason could tell immediately that this was someone important. The man stood in the doorway for a moment, observing the group of friends with a gaze that seemed to pierce through them. Jason felt a chill run down his spine. This man was not just a palace official, he was someone with power, someone who could make decisions that would affect their future. The tension in the room increased tenfold. "Jason," the man said, his voice calm but firm, "I am General Arslan, and I have been informed of your actions. You will come with me." His words carried a sense of finality, and Jason didn't argue. He stood up, his legs shaky from the long wait, and followed the general out of the room. As Jason walked through the palace corridors, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his mistake pressing down on him even more. The general didn't speak to him as they walked, but Jason could feel the gravity of the situation. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he knew that it wasn't going to be easy. And as he followed the general deeper into the heart of the palace, he realized that this was just the beginning of the journey he would have to take, a journey that would test not only his physical strength, but also his character. As Jason followed General Arslan through the grand halls of the palace, his thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and regret. The palace, which had seemed so majestic and awe-inspiring only hours ago, now felt imposing and cold. Every step he took echoed through the empty halls, adding to the heavy weight on his shoulders. The decision he had made in a moment of impulse had led him to this point. He had never imagined that something so small, an impulsive kick, could spiral into such a serious situation. They arrived at a large, ornate door at the end of the corridor. The general knocked sharply before pushing the door open. Jason followed him into a large, well-lit room with high ceilings and intricate tapestries on the walls. In the center of the room sat a group of officials, all dressed in elaborate uniforms, their eyes fixed on the two newcomers. The room was filled with an air of authority and quiet power. One of the officials, an older man with graying hair and piercing eyes, stood up as they entered. "General Arslan," he said with a nod. "You've brought him here, I see." His voice was calm but firm, and his eyes quickly moved from the general to Jason, sizing him up. Jason felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. The room was silent for a long moment, and all Jason could hear was the sound of his own heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't help but feel small and insignificant in the presence of these high-ranking officials. These were people who had likely spent their lives in positions of power, making decisions that affected entire nations. And here he was, an outsider, having made one careless mistake. "Sit," the older man said, gesturing to an empty chair in front of the table. Jason hesitated for a moment before sitting down. His palms were sweaty, his stomach in knots. He could feel the weight of the stares from everyone in the room. There was no escaping the reality of his situation now. General Arslan stood behind him, silent, as the older man continued to observe him. "Tell me," the man said, his voice steady, "why did you do it? Why did you kick one of our royal guards?" Jason swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. His throat felt dry, and he could feel the pressure mounting with every passing second. It was a mistake," he began, his voice shaking. "I didn't mean any harm. I was just playing around. I thought it would be funny. It wasn't supposed to go this far." The older man's expression remained unreadable. "A mistake, you say? Tell me, Jason, what makes you think that this behavior is acceptable? What makes you think it's okay to disrespect someone who serves with such dedication and honor?" Jason was caught off guard by the question. He had never thought about it like that. He had seen the royal guards as statues, symbols of tradition, standing still and unflinching. To him, they had seemed like part of the scenery, no different from the statues or paintings that adorn the walls of the palace. But now, faced with the reality of his actions, he saw things differently. The guard was not just a figure in a uniform, he was a person, someone with a job and a responsibility far greater than Jason had ever realized. "I didn't see it that way," Jason admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think. I acted on impulse, and I deeply regret it." The older man nodded slowly, as if processing Jason's words. "You know, martial arts is not just about fighting. It's about discipline, respect, and control. It's about understanding that your actions, no matter how small they may seem at the time, can have consequences. It's about learning to think before you act, to weigh your decisions carefully." Jason felt a pang of guilt as the man spoke. He had spent so many years training in martial arts, yet in that one moment of impulse, he had thrown all of that away. His training had taught him how to fight, how to defend himself, but it hadn't taught him the most important lesson of all, how to control his impulses and act with wisdom. "I understand," Jason said quietly. "I've spent so many years focusing on my physical strength, my technique, but I never really thought about the responsibility that comes with that. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." The room was silent for a moment. The officials exchanged glances, as if deliberating over something. Jason's nerves were on edge, but he didn't speak. He knew he had to wait for their judgment. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew that his fate rested in their hands. Finally, the older man spoke again, his tone softer this time. "Apologizing is a start, but it's not enough. You've shown us that you understand your mistake, but now you must prove that you've learned from it. You must show that you are worthy of the respect you seek from others." Jason looked up at him, confusion written on his face. "What do you mean?" The man smiled slightly, though there was no humor in his expression. "We will not simply let this go. You will spend time with one of our royal guards, learning the true meaning of discipline and respect. You will see firsthand what it means to serve with honor, to stand at attention for hours on end without faltering. It will be a test of your character." Jason blinked in surprise. "You want me to train with one of your guards?" "Not just train," the man replied. "You will spend time with them, learn their ways, their values. You will understand the weight of their responsibilities, and you will see what it truly means to be a master not only of your body, but of your mind and spirit as well." Jason was stunned. This was not what he had expected. He had thought there would be punishment, perhaps even an arrest, but instead, they were offering him something entirely different. A chance to learn, to grow, and to make amends for his mistake. "This is your opportunity to prove that you can become more than just a skilled fighter," the older man continued. "It is an opportunity for you to earn back the respect you've lost and to understand the true essence of what it means to be a martial artist." Jason sat back in his chair, trying to process what he had just heard. It wasn't a punishment. It was a chance to learn from someone who had dedicated their life to a cause far greater than anything he had ever known. And for the first time in a long time, Jason felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. "Thank you," Jason said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I will do whatever it takes. I want to learn." The older man nodded, as if satisfied with his response. "Good. We will arrange for your time with the guard to begin tomorrow. Be prepared, Jason. This will not be easy. It will test your patience, your strength, and your ability to control yourself." Jason stood up, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. He had made a mistake, but now he had the chance to make things right. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a path he was ready to walk. And as he followed General Arslan back out of the room, he realized that this experience, painful and humbling as it was, might just be the most valuable lesson of his life. The next morning, Jason woke up early, the weight of what he was about to do pressing heavily on his chest. He had been given a chance to make things right, but it wasn't going to be easy. After the meeting with the officials, General Arslan had escorted him to a small, modest room near the guards' quarters. The room was plain, with just a bed, a chair, and a small table. There were no distractions, no comforts. It was designed for focus and discipline. Jason had spent the night lying awake, thinking about everything that had led him here. He had always prided himself on his strength, his ability to defend and fight. But now, that strength felt like something shallow, something he had misunderstood. What use was his speed, his power, if he couldn't control himself when it mattered most? He had kicked a royal guard without thinking, without understanding the true weight of his actions. He hadn't realized how much more it meant to be a martial artist than just being good at fighting. Jason stood up from the bed, stretched, and walked over to the small window. The morning light filtered through, casting a warm glow on the palace grounds. It looked peaceful, far removed from the tension and confusion he had felt the day before. But Jason knew that today, things would be different. Today, he would learn what it really meant to be a martial artist. It wasn't about the moves or the techniques, it was about respect, discipline, and self-control. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. General Arslan stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "Time to begin," he said simply, and Jason followed him out of the room without a word. They walked through the corridors of the palace once again, this time with a new sense of purpose in Jason's step. He wasn't sure what awaited him, but he was determined to face it head on. After a short walk, they arrived at a large courtyard. In the center of the space stood a figure, tall and strong, wearing the same ceremonial uniform as the guard Jason had kicked the day before. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He recognized him immediately. It was the same guard, the one he had disrespected. The one whose face he had kicked. The guard stood still, his gaze unwavering, his posture perfect. He didn't look at Jason as he approached, but Jason could feel the intensity in the air. This was the man who embodied the kind of discipline Jason had only ever dreamed of achieving. And now, he was the one who would teach Jason what it meant to be truly strong. "This is Sergeant Kadir," General Arslan said. "He has served as a royal guard for over 15 years. He has seen more battles, more struggles, than you can imagine. And he will be the one to help you understand what you've been missing." Sergeant Kadir turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Jason's for the first time. There was no anger there, no resentment. Only a calm, steady gaze that seemed to pierce through Jason. The guard said nothing. He simply gestured for Jason to follow him as he began to walk to the far end of the courtyard. Jason took a deep breath and followed. This was it. This was the beginning of his true training. The first thing Sergeant Kadir did was ask Jason to stand at attention. It was a simple command, but Jason quickly realized that standing still wasn't as easy as it seemed. His muscles itched to move, to adjust, to fidget. But Sergeant Kadir didn't allow for any of that. He stood there, perfectly still, for what felt like hours, watching Jason closely. He didn't speak, but Jason could feel the pressure building. It was as if every moment was a test, every second an opportunity for him to prove that he could be disciplined. At first, Jason's body fought him. His legs started to shake, his arms ached, and his back screamed for relief. He wanted to move, to stretch, to do anything other than stand there. But every time he looked over at Sergeant Kadir, the guard remained unmoved. He didn't seem to struggle at all. His body was as still as a statue, his face calm, and his eyes unwavering. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sergeant Kadir spoke. "This is the first lesson. It's not about moving fast or being strong. It's about controlling yourself. It's about learning when to act and when to wait. You have to understand that not every situation requires action. Sometimes, the greatest strength is in stillness." Jason stood there, sweat beginning to form on his forehead, trying to hold his position. He had never felt so uncomfortable in his life. But there was something about the way Sergeant Kadir spoke that made him want to listen, to learn. This man had the kind of control that Jason had always sought, but never truly understood. They stayed in that position for nearly an hour. Every minute felt like an eternity, and yet, with each passing moment, Jason's respect for Sergeant Kadir grew. He realized that this was more than just a physical test. It was a mental one. It was about mastering his mind, his emotions, and his impulses. It was about understanding that sometimes, the hardest thing to do was nothing at all. When they finally moved on to the next exercise, Jason was exhausted, both physically and mentally. But Sergeant Kadir didn't let up. The next challenge was an exercise in focus. Jason was asked to strike a series of targets placed in front of him, each one a different distance away. But there was a catch: he had to strike the targets without thinking. He was not allowed to focus on the action. He had to let his body react instinctively, without hesitation. At first, Jason's strikes were slow and clumsy. He was trying too hard to focus on the technique, on the precision of each movement. But Sergeant Kadir stopped him after the first few attempts. "You're thinking too much," he said calmly. "You're trying to control everything. Let go. Let your body do what it's been trained to do." Jason nodded and took a deep breath. He cleared his mind and let go of his need to control every movement. This time, when he struck the targets, he did so with more fluidity, more confidence. Each strike felt more natural, more instinctive. It wasn't about perfecting each movement, it was about trusting his training and allowing his body to react without hesitation. Sergeant Kadir nodded approvingly as Jason completed the exercise. This is another part of discipline. It's not just about controlling your actions. It's about letting go of the need to control every moment. It's about trusting yourself and your training. As the day went on, Jason was pushed harder and harder. Every exercise tested him, both physically and mentally. His body was sore, his muscles fatigued, but he kept going. He didn't want to stop. He wanted to prove to himself that he could do this, that he could learn the true meaning of discipline and control. By the end of the day, Jason was exhausted, but he felt something else as well. He felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about being the strongest, the fastest, or the most skilled fighter. It was about knowing when to act and when to remain still. It was about understanding the true power of self-discipline and control. As he stood there, facing Sergeant Kadir, Jason felt a deep sense of gratitude. The lessons he had learned today were not just about martial arts, they were about life. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was beginning to understand what it truly meant to be a master. The days that followed were grueling, but Jason found himself growing in ways he hadn't expected. Every morning, he met with Sergeant Kadir for further lessons in control, discipline, and humility. The pain from the earlier sessions had faded, but the lessons they carried stayed with him. He had learned that real strength was not about being the fastest or the most powerful, it was about knowing when to act and when to hold back, about being able to control both your body and your mind. At first, Jason had struggled with these lessons. His martial arts training had always been about pushing through physical limits, testing his abilities, and overcoming obstacles. But now, he was learning to control his impulses, to master his emotions, and to act with purpose rather than on instinct alone. It was a challenge he hadn't anticipated, but one that was making him rethink his entire approach to martial arts. One morning, as they stood in the courtyard once again, Sergeant Kadir spoke to him. "You've made great progress, Jason," he said, his tone steady and calm. "You've learned the importance of stillness, the power of focus, and the value of patience. But there's one more thing you must understand." Jason looked at him, intrigued. He had learned so much, but he knew there was still more to this training that he hadn't yet grasped. "Discipline," Sergeant Kadir continued, "isn't just about physical control. It's also about your interactions with others. Your actions affect those around you. When you act impulsively, without thinking, you not only put yourself in danger, you risk the well-being of others as well. A true martial artist understands that their actions have consequences. And they take responsibility for those consequences." Jason nodded, the words sinking in. He had come to understand the importance of control in his own actions, but now he was being asked to extend that understanding to his relationships with others. His earlier actions kicking the royal guard in the face had been impulsive and reckless. He hadn't thought about how his behavior would affect those around him. But now, he realized, the lesson was much bigger than just controlling his own body. It was about understanding the responsibility that came with his skills. "You must learn to take responsibility for what you've done," Sergeant Kadir added. "That means more than just apologizing. It means making amends, showing that you understand the weight of your actions." Jason thought about this for a moment. It wasn't enough to simply apologize to the royal guard. He needed to show that he understood the impact of his actions, and he needed to make it right. But how could he do that? What could he possibly do to make up for what he had done? How can I make amends? Jason asked, his voice sincere. Sergeant Kadir studied him for a moment, then nodded. The first step is understanding the gravity of what you did. You already know that. The next step is to face the person you hurt and show them that you've learned from this mistake. It's about humility, about admitting that you were wrong and showing that you're willing to change. Jason felt a deep sense of responsibility wash over him. He had caused harm not just to the Royal Guard, but to the whole system of respect and honor that they represented. And now, it was up to him to prove that he could change, that he could learn from this mistake and become a better person because of it. The next day, Jason was escorted back to the palace where the Royal Guard stood. This time, he wasn't there as a tourist, as someone who could simply walk by and admire their discipline from a distance. This time, he was there to face the consequences of his actions. As he approached the Royal Guard's post, he could feel the weight of the moment. His heart beat faster, and he took a deep breath to steady himself. The guard who had been kicked, the one who had shown him the greatest lesson of all, stood before him once again, as still and silent as ever. Jason approached him slowly, his mind focused. He had thought about this moment for days, had rehearsed what he would say in his mind. Now, with the guard standing in front of him, Jason knew that this was his chance to make things right. He stopped in front of the guard, looking him in the eye. The guard's expression remained neutral, but Jason could see a glimmer of something in his eyes, something that spoke of understanding. "I owe you an apology," Jason said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "What I did was wrong. I acted impulsively, without thinking about the consequences. I didn't understand what it meant to show respect, and I hurt you. I'm sorry." The Royal Guard said nothing, but Jason could feel the weight of his gaze. There was no anger in it, no bitterness. Just a quiet, unwavering presence. And for the first time, Jason understood why he had chosen this path. The Royal Guard wasn't just a symbol of tradition. He was a person, just like Jason, who had devoted his life to something greater than himself. And Jason had disrespected that. "I've learned something important," Jason continued, his voice filled with humility. "I've learned that true strength isn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about controlling yourself, your actions, and your impulses. It's about understanding the responsibility that comes with the power you hold. And I've learned that my actions have consequences not just for me, but for others as well." The Royal Guard remained silent, but Jason could see a slight shift in his posture. He wasn't sure if it was forgiveness, but it was something. Something that told him he had taken the first step toward making things right. "Thank you," Jason said quietly, bowing his head slightly. "I will work every day to be better. To show more respect, more discipline, and more humility." The Royal Guard nodded once, his expression still calm. And with that, Jason knew that this chapter of his journey had come to a close. But it was not the end. It was just the beginning of a new way of thinking, a new way of being. As he walked away from the palace, Jason felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. He had made a mistake, but he had learned from it. And in doing so, he had gained something far more valuable than any trophy or title could ever give him: wisdom, humility, and the understanding that true strength comes not from the body, but from the mind and the heart. The lessons he had learned with Sergeant Kadir and the Royal Guard had changed him in ways he couldn't fully express. But one thing was certain, he would carry those lessons with him for the rest of his life. And as he moved forward, he knew that he would never forget the importance of respect, discipline, and self-control, qualities that every true martial artist must possess.